Hi, and welcome to episode 1 of AAC Access All Areas. I'm Ali Batty.
I'm Ruth Jones, and today's question is, what is AAC? So I'm going to hand you back to Ali, who's actually written a book on the topic.
Yes, that's slightly daunting. I'm not going to condense my book into a 20-minute conversation. I'm going to give you the easy answer, I hope. So AAC stands for augmentative and alternative communication, and that is a very long-winded way of describing a form of communication that does not use speech. So the most of us would use speech for communication, but there are some people who are unable to make use of speech. They might have difficulties with the coordination for speech. They might have a condition like cerebral palsy that makes their speech unclear. And so they need an alternative to speech, or something that augments their natural speech. So that's where the augmentative and alternative comes in. And typically these days that would take the form of an iPad with a communication app, which might use symbols, or it might have an on-screen keyboard, and the AAC user would select symbols on the screen or type in a message, and then that iPad has the voice output, which will then speak aloud their message. What other forms of AAC can you think of, Ruth?
Well, I'm thinking about particularly for a lot of my caseload, who are autistic, other kind of neurodivergent profiles, but primarily autistic in sort of special educational need provision. We do a lot of like paper-based AAC that I think people sometimes would just think of as symbols, but actually it is part of that AAC toolbox. So things like visual pain scales, things like rating scales for how they find the work that they're doing in class, that kind of thing. And I thought was really interesting is when you were talking about types of people like that might use AAC and what that can look like, because we can use it, can't we? We all use it. I would often, if I'm lost for words or stuck for words, send like I don't know if it's GIF or GIF, I'm never sure, but like, and use emojis, those kinds of things. So we all kind of use alternative forms of
Yes,
communication all day, don't we? And I think
yes,
sometimes we can kind of get a bit stuck on AAC being a one thing, but actually AAC
yes.
is often a toolbox for each
Absolutely.
individual.
Yes, yes. And I think if I reflect on some of the children and young people that I've ever worked with, the most kind of successful, oh, I hate that term actually, the most resourceful, creative communicators, I would say, can pull on anything and use it as AAC. So whether it's a calendar, or a poster or a magazine, or writing on a mini whiteboard or on a notepad, anything can take the form of AAC. And like you say, we use things like text messaging and email, or we write things down, and we might share that with other people for communication purposes. So the definition of AAC can be really wide. I suppose in our field,
Mm.
in the field of speech and language therapists, because both Ruth and me are both speech and language therapists. It has sort of taken the form of a specialism within speech and language therapy, and that would then um, we'd be thinking about things like Makaton signs and communication boards, communication books, maybe buttons with single messages on, or a couple of messages. So those are the more sort of clinical applications for AAC, I would say.
Yeah, and I'm also thinking about like the e-tran frames, where you
Mm,
get like for some
yeah.
individuals they'd kind of like use eye pointing and you'd have a frame with letters on and they'd point to them. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? Is there's kind of what is inclusive or a total communication environment, and that might have AAC tools in it, but quite often we'd think, I suppose, about an individual having a system that is like their main
Yes.
AAC system, but it is still part of that wider toolbox. So
Yes.
it might be somebody who has a communication book or an iPad app, and they
Mm.
would use other things alongside it.
Yes, and I
And
think
also
it's
like
useful
things like
also
when
to
tech
think
fails
of,
us.
yes, yeah. I was just gonna say, Ruth, it's also useful to think of AAC tools that might be used for many different people within an environment, like those sort of visual schedules, and an individualized AAC solution for a particular person. And if we're thinking of that AAC system for a particular person, we want that to be what's termed a robust AAC system. So we want it to
Hmm.
have an extensive vocabulary, not just a few words that someone else thinks the child might want or need, but access to all the words. Um, and it will have that capacity that the child's language can grow. So it's not just single words, but it's got the
Hmm.
ability for that child or young person or adult to be able to formulate phrases or sentences, and hopefully to spell as well or type. And it can be fully editable so that that person's particular sort of phrases or words that they really need that are very personal to them are included in that robust system as well.
Yeah, and it's just made me think actually when you're talking about what adults might want them to say is that actually there's broader functions as well. Because quite often you can see really well-meaning adults thinking, oh, the things that they want to talk about are the things that they want. So I'll make them a choosing board, or I'll kind of start some initial AAC work on I want and pictures of things that they might want. And there comes in kind of a bit with our neurodiversity affirming practice, doesn't there, about kind of honoring all methods of communication. And so recognizing where an individual would really need AAC and, would need some AAC support, but also if they are pointing to the object that they want, then honor
Yes,
that communication. You
yes,
might
yes. Don't
model
need
on
to
an
say it
AAC tool
twice.
alongside, like, let's play or
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
exactly.
I think in
You know,
terms of,
and I
if
think that's such a shift.
yes, absolutely. Because I've seen that in settings where a child has just actually used their speech to ask for something, and then a well-meaning member of staff has said, "And now use your Makaton." And it's a bit like, if I've just
Yeah,
told you something in English, you, Ruth, saying, "And now tell me it in Arabic." We don't need to do that. If we understood
yeah,
it the first time, then we go with that. And then you also
yeah.
touched
And I
on
think that
language
for me really
functions.
is a shift as well.
Yes, yeah. I was just going to say, you also talked about language functions, Ruth, and I think
Mm,
we, as a profession, have almost like given this impression that communication starts with requesting, and I no longer believe that. I think
yeah.
communication starts with connection. So it's sort of sharing the moment and noticing something in that other person and acknowledging it. And that's way more important than asking for a biscuit, or asking for a particular toy. That brings more joy and sense of connection, um, and that we're in this together. And I see much more engagement from children when we come at it from that approach, rather than I'm going to teach you how to make a request, which A, is a bit boring. B, it can be a bit condescending and patronizing, because just because a person is non-speaking doesn't mean that they don't have language in their head, and quite complex language beyond the here and now and making requests.
Mm.
And so feeling that we just need to start with requests might not be the most engaging, motivating, joyful way to introduce AAC.
Yeah, and I think there's that thing, isn't there, about joy. And actually, if I'm just holding something and basically not giving it to you unless you've done the thing that I'm expecting you to do, I kind of don't think that's communication. I think that is like sort of a bit of more like a behavioral interaction. And I think, like you
And a
said, it's
power
about what's
dynamic.
joyful. Just taking me back. Yes. Communication is a shared experience. It's not a you do X, then Y happens. Like that's kind of not really what the underpinning, you know, way of being for communication is it? And I think back just to uh session just this week and how I would have dealt with it 10 years ago to how I deal with it now. And it's a little one who loves cars, really likes lining them up and kind of looking at the shadows and the shapes and tuning in. And one day I kind of go and I sit alongside. Sometimes I'll pass a car over, sometimes and we're introducing AAC in paper form as well as with device. We're just seeing what fits best because their sensory profile and their visual system. I'm not sure whether the iPad might be a bit too much for their
Mm.
visual sensory processing, but we're exploring that anyway. Tangent. That the child picked up a car and then it dropped, and I went, "Oh, nashed!" And they looked with the biggest beaming smile on their face, and then crashed it again and looked at me like,
Mm.
"Wow, isn't this fun?" And
Yes.
then the following week, I saw them and they did it again, and it was like clearly like, "I see you, we
Yes.
play, and this is something that's funny." And there
Yes.
was just joy. And so what I was then doing was we had the paper-based system, and I'm going, "Oh, it crashed." And we're using AAC to support a connection, not to
Yes.
make a communication. If I was kind of holding those cards and expecting them to point to car before I gave them one car and then another car and then
Yes.
another car, like
Yes.
that wouldn't be fun and that wouldn't be
No,
meaningful. It would
but
just
it
be this
really
sort of
interrupts the flow of
full
communication when you do that as well. So I've seen this a lot in my practice where we've introduced AAC and it feels like a really big thing to the adults. Like, okay, right, I've introduced AAC. I must get the child to use it now. And it actually gets in the way of that connection and that conversation because the adult is so worried about doing it in air quotes right and finding the exact right word for the time that they're not sort of looking at the child anymore and not engaging with the child, and they're certainly not able to join in that fun activity. So we're hoping on this podcast to bring the fun into AAC rather than make it a chore
yeah.
and something that we're teaching. It's not a sort of, I must get the child to do something. It is, we're going to just lightly offer something using AAC alongside all of the other glorious things that that child is already doing.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, isn't it? Is when it comes to AAC and what it is, what it looks like, actually what we think of as tools is constantly evolving, and the way that we are using it is constantly evolving. And there's like phases, aren't there, with AAC? I think you've got that introductory phase where it is very much just part of it. Then you might have that early engagement phase, and then that looks a bit different. And then you've got like really proficient AAC users where really you're, as a speech therapist, you totally hands off backed away because they're doing their thing and they've got the communication tools that they need. So I think what AAC looks like changes and transitions, doesn't it? In terms of how, like how that experience is. And there might be some sessions I work with some AAC users where we maybe don't even use their AAC for parts of the
Yes,
session because actually the interactions we're having are so meaningful, we
yes,
don't
yes,
need, or it might make me go, "Oh, I'm going to put that on your AAC because I can tell by your gestures and your vocalizations that you're telling me this thing and I know it, but other people might not know it. So while we're
yes,
here, let's put that on here, or let's
yes.
make a note to add it to the paper-based, those kind of things. So I
Yeah.
think there's something
I like to
very
think of it in terms of
evolutionary about
there
AAC.
are rhythms of connection or rhythms of communication. So if I am in a session with a child, we might have a little burst of using the AAC because that just feels right for the moment. And that child will be really engaged, either looking over at what I'm doing on the AAC, or they are initiating that and having a little explore of it. But then also there will be periods in that session where I'm modeling just spoken language, just my sort of natural spoken language, because that feels right in that moment. So, I might be saying something like, oops, I dropped it, because that's just a spontaneous thing. And we don't yet have that on their AAC system. I might be adding it, like you said, that I might realise, oh, we need that. But if we don't have it, I would just be modelling that with my natural spoken language, because we also need to support that child's understanding of language, so their receptive language. We're not going to take away our spoken language support for them. And then also with those rhythms of connection, a child might move away from us and just have a little bit of quiet thinking time. And that's really important as well.
Mm.
to develop, it offers them that opportunity to develop their inner voice if I'm not talking constantly and if I'm not modeling AAC constantly. So yeah, I like to think of it as being sort of a bit like a song that might have a verse and a chorus and then a sort of interlude, an instrumental interlude, where I'm not modeling anything particularly, but we're just in that you know a moment of communing together, or a bit sharing the same space, um and it's very much
Yeah.
led, so I'm trying to read what the child is wanting to do in that moment and taking um their non-verbal communication as my cue. What do they want or need from me in this moment? So the point I'm trying to make is we're not relentlessly shoving the AAC at them or shoving spoken language at them. We're trying to just provide that language when it is going to be most useful and meaningful for them.
Yeah, and that could be really hard, can't it? Like, what does an AAC session, what does AAC therapy look like? And that difference between I'm just tuning into you and I'm noticing what your non-verbals are telling me. And I might just model like, oh, let's have a rest, or let's
Mm,
have a break, or let's be
mm,
quiet, and then let them be in those moments. Because I've definitely had sessions where I'm a bit like, oh gosh, there's other people watching me. I
mm.
must be modeling all the time because that's what this AAC session's for. And I'm, like sort of half running around after a child, like, I'm like, why am I doing this? So I
Yes,
think there is
yes.
something, isn't there, about,
Yeah,
for
because
me,
'cause we're
sometimes
trying
I
to
feel
be
much more
natural,
confident
aren't we? And if you
when I'm not
think about
observed.
your most natural interactions with, say, your closest family members or your friends, if we're really comfortable with someone, we do go into periods of quiet where we're not feeling that pressure to say anything or do anything. And I think that really helps with co-regulation, to just know that we're not constantly expected to perform. Um, and uh, Probably like you, I do have to just take a rain check sometimes of like, okay, how regulated am I? Am I talking too much because I'm nervous because the TA is in this session as well? And if I take that note, oh yeah, I'm talking too much because I'm worrying what that TA is thinking. That is my kind of cue. Okay, do less, because we don't want to take
Yeah.
over that session. We are trying to be child led and give that child opportunities to come up
Mm.
with their own ideas and process their own thoughts into language.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's something that I think particularly for a lot of education, health parents, when you're in that role as communication partner with AAC, where you're introducing it, knowing how much and when to kind of model, I think can be really tricky, can't it? So maybe we'll have
Mm.
to have that as like our next
Yeah.
episode as a question. I don't know, but something
Yes.
about like
Make a note.
what it is. I think we've done a really, yeah, that's it, absolutely. I'm just thinking like we've talked quite a bit about like what AAC is today, haven't we? And like actually like what does it look like? How does it feel? But actually there's then that like how do you know when is too much? Like when is a
Mm,
good time to do it? Like what does that need to look like? Because it can feel a lot of pressure, can't it? And I think
mm,
particularly, if you've got within some of the systems where you might get a trial just for a period of time, or you might get like a certain criteria that has to be met in order to move to the next stage of a process. And so it does feel quite pressurized to be able to make those quick jumps in communication progress, which sadly just often isn't the way that it happens with AAC. But I think that pressure is really important, isn't it, to recognize in ourselves as communication partners?
yes, yes. Um, I yes, I think allowing ourselves thinking time is really important. So, um, just I suppose from the way that I practice now, I just try and remind myself, no, you've got this. If you are in the moment, you'll know what to do next. You don't need a plan. Because it's actually it's a real relief that you will know what to do next if you're in the moment with the child, because only need to sort of observe and be with them, and then it will come to you what you need to do next. So it's quite freeing as well, that we don't have to be in control and have an agenda with this. We can just observe, what is this child most interested in? What do they absolutely love doing? And what do they not like about our interaction? And that will also lead us to modeling the right language, whether that is,
Mhm.
no, not like that, or let me do it, or give me space. That will just unfold naturally if we are there in the moment.
Yeah, I think so. And I feel like that's a really lovely way to kind of capture our conversation for today as we kind of draw this first episode to a close, is thinking about that, yeah, what AAC is about that tuning in, isn't it? And then knowing when to model and how to model, with your tools. So we will have
And
a
we
little
will be
think on
talking
some
in
of the questions
future
we've asked ourselves today.
episodes. Yeah, we will be talking in future episodes about, specific AAC tools like communication apps on an iPad, or communication charts and books. So that is coming, but we just didn't want to overload you in this first episode, and we're still practicing. So we can't get too much into one episode.
Oh my gosh, but I think we could probably have stayed here all day and talked about this. So
I think so.
we'll break it down into episodes for everyone and hopefully share some really useful information, and as you say, kind of bring some fun to accessing all areas of AAC. So thanks for the chat today, Ali. It's been lovely. And I'll see you for the next episode.
Lovely.